If we're going to be honest, people are expecting the Jets to be a bad team in 2025, but it does not need to be that way. In fact, this team can exceed expectations, potentially by quite a bit. It all begins with a potentially dominant run game. Let's dive into it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, May 6th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're going to look forward to the 2025 New York Jets. The roster is now largely set. We could see a move here or there between now and the start of the season. But after the NFL draft, you kind of know what you're going into the season with. And expectations are pretty low for this team. Our partners over at FanDuel only have the Jets with an over-under of 5.5 wins. So the odds makers are expecting the Jets to be about as bad as they were in 2024. But I don't think it needs to be that way. In fact, I think this Jets team could exceed expectations potentially by quite a bit. And today we're going to talk about the pathway for that. Part of the formula will be the Jets dominating the third phase of the game. Part of the formula will be a defensive bounce back after a disappointing 2024. But let's begin by talking about the offense. And this is an offense that I think has some challenges. I think particularly in the passing game. So this is going to be an offense that's going to have to be built a very specific way. And this is an offense that's going to have to maximize its opportunities. If you are a team that's star-studded, if you're the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, or the Bengals with Joe Burrow and those receivers, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, you can miss on opportunities. You don't necessarily need to hit on all of your big play opportunities. For an offense with a passing game that's probably going to be a bit challenged, like the Jets with Justin Fields at quarterback and a receiving group that includes Garrett Wilson, which is a good place to start. Through the history of this podcast, we've been doing this since 2016. Prior to Garrett Wilson arriving, we did not have a number one receiver. Now we do. So we at least have a good starting point, which has not been true of the Jets through much of their recent history. But the passing game is an issue. The Jets are going to need to maximize their passing game. But I think more than anything, the Jets are going to need to have a dominant rushing attack this season. I think the Jets, if they're going to have a good season, they're going to have to be like one of the top three teams in the league in rushing. Now, the good news is I actually see the elements of a potentially dominant rushing attack here. In fact, I think there are three elements. I think the offensive line could be a strength in this area, and it may be more of a strength than it was a year ago. Maybe I'm being a little over optimistic, but I think that the offensive line, this could be a very strong run blocking unit. I think, if you look at what's in the backfield, there are two elements in the backfield. Can your quarterback make plays with his legs, and how good are your running backs? And I think for the Jets, all three of these elements, if they're not locks to be good, they're very promising. And there's reason for optimism in all three elements. So we could start by talking about the offensive line. The Jets, of course, filled the last spot that was a real question mark by taking Armand Membou in 7th overall in the NFL draft. And he will, you could probably pencil him in at right tackle. As I've said, it's possible, like there's an outside shot. Maybe he doesn't start day one, but if all things are equal, or all things are close to equal, Armand Membou is going to step into the starting lineup because that's what the Jets want. When you draft a guy 7th overall, unless your team is just like completely stacked at a position, the guy you pick is going to go into the starting lineup in most cases. And this is now an offensive line, especially on the right side of that line, that should be pretty strong in run blocking. Joe Tippmann, I think, had a good season last year at the center position as a run blocker. Elijah Vera Tucker has always been a pretty strong run blocker at the guard position. And Armand Membou, not quite a finished product, but a guy who's going to be pretty good. A guy who I expect to be a pretty good run blocker. And we're going back a really long time, but if you go all the way back to 2010, which was the last time the Jets were good, they had a right side of the line that could just bulldoze people. They had Nick Mangold at center. They had Brandon Moore at right guard, and they had Damian Woody at right tackle. And for those Jets teams, those Jets teams had dominant rushing attacks, but most of the run plays went to the right side. When the Jets, or at least I would say when the Jets really needed a big run play, when they absolutely had to get a yard or two on third or fourth down, the ball was being run to the right side, and those guys could move defenders. And I think the Jets are going to have a good run blocking line. But one element they did not have in 2010 was a quarterback with ability to make plays with his legs. Mark Sanchez was actually pretty mobile back in 2010, but Justin Fields takes it to another level. Justin Fields, for whatever his limitations are as a passer, offers a lot of intriguing skills as a runner. He's one of the handful of quarterbacks in this league who you legitimately can make a big part of your run game, in part because he's very athletic. He's also big. He's not a guy who's going to who's going to absorb a pounding, in the run game and then be likely to be banged up, because he got a big frame, so he can absorb hits and still stay on the field and not have it diminish his performance. And when you have a quarterback who can add to the run game, it adds a lot of plays to your playbook, because you can design plays that essentially become Fields rolls out, and if he sees a running lane, he runs, and if he doesn't, he throws. And you can also develop option plays. And option plays are kind of what they sound like. The quarterback has an option. The quarterback kind of reads the defense to decide who runs the ball. Typically on an option play, one defender in the front seven is unblocked, and that's the read guy. So you stick the ball out, you see if the running back, you stick the ball out for the running back, and you read that the unblocked guy. If the unblocked guy goes to the running back, quarterback pulls it and runs it. And if he stays at home and it looks like he's going to defend the quarterback keeper, you hand it off. And this is the type of thing that I think could really unlock Breece Hall. Breece Hall had a bit of a difficult 2020. It wasn't an awful 2024, but it was not a 2024 that was up to Breece Hall standards, particularly as a big play threat. Well, you add Fields to the mix. Fields can, when you add these option plays to the handoffs, you're essentially freezing one defender, and that could open bigger holes for Breece Hall along with the quality blocking. But Fields also has pretty good long speed, so Fields can, if he keeps it, he's a big play threat with his legs. And the Jets also have two young backs in Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen, who they like. Aaron Glenn's said complimentary things about them. So Justin Fields is going to have to improve as a passer. Tanner Engstrand's going to have to coach him up. Tanner Engstrand's going to have to scheme up a good passing game that makes life easier on Fields. Jets are going to need to pass block effectively. This stuff's all important. When I say the Jets need to build a dominant run game, that's not to say Justin Fields can be a bad passer. Justin Fields is going to have to improve as a passer moving forward. But the Jets can probably lean on the run game more than most teams this year. And every play you make in the run game is one less play you need to make in the passing game. And that's a positive. And I think the Jets also can incorporate the screen game. I think if Tanner Engstrand's as good of a play designer as the Jets are hoping he'll be, coming from the Detroit Lions, coming from an offense that's was one of the best designed offenses in the league last year, hopefully you can design touches in space for your playmakers. Get Breece Hall the ball in space on screens. We just talked yesterday about Arian Smith, a guy who with a lot of speed, who you can design touches for him, get him the ball in space. That takes some of the workload off your quarterback. It's your quarterback. Every play you design where a fast guy takes a screen or takes an end around or takes a jet sweep, makes a big play. That's one less time your quarterback needs to stand in the pocket and scan the defense. So this is really about making life easier for Justin Fields. Justin Fields needs to improve as a passer. I'm not saying Justin Fields, and not to make Justin Fields out to be the bad passer. He's had some very good moments in this league, but he's been inconsistent. That's part of the reason he's with the Jets right now. And to make life easier on Justin Fields, Jets, I think, should and can build a pretty strong run game, and Fields will be a part of that. And that could be the type of thing that could help the Jets surprise this year. I had you on the Locked On Jets podcast. We'll talk about the defensive side of the ball. I think it's no surprise, and it's not exactly a change of pace, that the Jets are probably going to lean on their defense this year. And they're going to need the defense to play better than it did a year ago. So how does this unit bounce back? It'll bounce back in a different way, and you'll see a different type of success than you saw under Robert Saleh. And we'll dive into that as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in on the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you're an NBA fan, it's been an exciting playoffs. You're a Knicks fan. I know you're very happy today. Knicks had a huge win in Game 1 against the Boston Celtics. Well, if you're not a Knicks fan or you're rooting for another team, FanDuel is a great way to get in on the action. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Again, FanDuel.com. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we're talking about how the New York Jets can defy low expectations and have a successful 2025 season. And easier to see this now that the roster is largely set. Of course, we'll see moves continue to be made. One or two of them may even be major between now and the start of the season, but the roster is now essentially pretty well known. It's pretty well formed. So how can the Jets have a successful season? Well, in the first segment, we talked about the offensive side of the ball, how the Jets are going to really need to lean into the run game. And that's not to say the passing game is important. When I talk like this, I don't want to give the impression like the passing game means nothing, because it is a passing league and you're going to have to pass the ball efficiently. But one of the ways you pass the ball efficiently is to run the ball. Use the run game to make the passing game more efficient. Essentially, if you run the ball effectively, it forces defenses to play the run, which makes it easier to pass. And your passing game tends to get more efficient. But I also think the Jets are going to need to lean to the defensive side of the ball. Last year was a disappointing year for the Jets on the defensive side of the ball. And we saw the performance really regress after Robert Saleh was fired, which is no surprise because you kind of had like a double whammy effect after the firing of Saleh. First of all, you lost Saleh, who's a good defensive mind, for all of his faults as a head coach, and there were many. He was an excellent defensive mind, but also Jeff Ulbrich had his attention pulled in all these different directions after that, and he tried to he kept the defensive coordinator job, and it was just too much to do both defensive coordinator and head coach together. So Jets defense saw their performance really fall. Although I do think there were reasons to believe that defense wasn't as strong even with Saleh there, because there was a game against New England where the Patriots were just really inept early in the season, and there was a game against Denver, which is a bad weather game where the Broncos had trouble, completing a forward pass. So there were, it was not a great defensive year by any stretch of the imagination for the Jets last year. There were some stats that made them look okay, but I think if you were watching them on a week-to-week basis, that it was not a particularly strong unit, especially when you compare it to what the Jets did in 2022 and 2023, where they had one of the best defenses in the NFL. So how did the Jets improve on defense? Well, actually, I think the number one answer is pretty simple. Jets have a lot of really good players on defense who just weren't as good last year as they normally are. So if we get Quinnen Williams playing up to his normal standard, and if we get Sauce Gardner playing up to his normal standard, that's going to be that right there is going to make a big difference. And then, you get Jermaine Johnson back. Jermaine Johnson did not play all that much last year. Suffered an early season injury, which knocked him out because he tore his Achilles tendon. And even a guy on the back end, Andre Cisco, who was with Jacksonville a year ago, had a down season, but a guy who's been a good player in the past. Sometimes when things go badly for your team, they just kind of snowball, and you get subpar performances from guys who are usually pretty good. And that happened. It happened with Cisco in Jacksonville, but I think it also happened with Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner to a degree last year with the Jets. And Michael Carter II, a guy who was one of the better slot corners in the league, had a down year. I think he was playing hurt most. I would chalk that up to injuries. I think Carter was playing hurt most of the year. So hopefully he'll have a healthier season. You look at the linebacker looks good with Jamie and Sherwood and Quincy Williams. Jets have pieces to have a good defense. Now, what's interesting is that Aaron Glenn's defense is different from Robert Saleh's. In fact, these are two defenses that are very different. Saleh is very much about rushing 4 guys, playing 7 guys in zone coverage. Glenn is more about blitzing and man-to-man coverage on the back end. And that changes what the objectives of the defense are. Now, ultimately, the objectives of the defense are to get stops. But, in the Saleh defense, it's really about the coverage. And it's also about kind of that taking chances. And the big plays you force are usually supposed to be turnovers. Although, ironically, Saleh's defense really wasn't that great at forcing turnovers. But the idea behind playing 7 guys deep is that the guys back there can take more gambles going for the ball. The corner can try and jump around because he knows if he misses, there are defenders behind him to clean it up and prevent the play from turning into a disaster. And the same thing goes for tackling. You can go for the strip when you have 7 guys back, because even if you miss the tackle, even if you don't get the fumble, there will be guys behind to clean it up and prevent the guy from going for a touchdown. When you're blitzing more, the big plays you're forcing, or at least the big plays you're trying to force, tend to be different. When you're blitzing more, you're more trying to get the big sack that essentially ends the drive, because sacks usually finish drive off. Unless the offense is able to hit a big play, or unless you're facing like an elite offense, you get a sack on an early down, the drive's usually finished. And then also, you're kind of to the extent you're forcing turnovers, a lot of them are going to be interceptions made by the safety, because you're playing man-to-man coverage. You can't really look at the ball. You have to track your guy across the field. When you're playing zone, zone's more conducive to interceptions, because you kind of have to stay aware of what's happening on the field all around you. You need to keep an eye on which guy's coming into your zone, where's the ball going, and you can keep your eyes on the backfield where the quarterback's going. In man-to-man coverage, you really have to keep your eyes on your man, because you're the man you're covering could go anywhere. But even in man-to-man, if you're playing a cover one defense, that means there's one safety deep, and that means that safety is still playing zone coverage, so he's keeping his eye on the quarterback. So the blitzes, are trying to get sacks, but they're also trying to force the quarterback to dump bad throws to the middle of the field, which a ball hawking safety is going to be able to pick off. And I think the Jets are hoping Andre Cisco will be that type of ball hawking safety, because he's prior to 2024, he had back-to-back seasons with 3+ interceptions. So he showed an ability, and if you watch him on the film those years, it looks like he had very good instincts in the back of the defense. Look, we know that the offense is going to be an issue we know the offense has been an issue with the Jets for years. The hope is that it's not as much of as much of an issue. The hope is that the Jets will be able to put more points on the board than they have been in past years. But I still think this is going to be a team, at least in 2025, that is built around the defense, that the defense really needs to deliver for this team to have success. And like I said, the good news is that there are pieces in place. There are a lot of good players on this defense. And this is, we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I've been saying this for months, that this team is not as bad as it's being made out to be. This 5.5 over under from our partners at FanDuel, and we love our partners at FanDuel. I think they're selling the Jets a little bit short, because there are pieces for this defense to be quite good. Even with Aaron Glenn running a different system from Robert Saleh, even with Glenn running a different system than we've seen succeed with the Jets, with a lot of the same personnel, this has the potential to be quite a good unit. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the third phase of the game. I really think special teams matters a lot in the NFL. Jets did not have a great special teams year in 2024, and that was unusual. But if they bounce back in 2025, and some of the personnel moves have suggested they're really focused on bouncing back, it could make a difference, and it could help bridge the gap between a successful season and the Jets. And we'll talk about that more as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Skylight Calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders, all in one easy-to-see space. It will mean so much to eliminate the I don't know excuse from your family's routine. Assigning everyone their own color will finally solve the who does what confusion in your house. Just think about how often plans get missed because they're buried in some digital calendar or not written down at all. Well, right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about the 2025 Jets and how they can exceed expectations. Jets not expected to have a very good team by most people, but it's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, we're coming off a 2-year stretch where the Jets were talking a lot about going to the Super Bowl. And year one, they went 7-10. Year two, they went 5-12. That was a team that came in with very high expectations and did not meet them. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for the Jets going with low expectations. Jets the last couple of years have been the ultimate over-promise and under-deliver team. Now maybe this year they could be the under-promise and over-deliver team. But that will require this team to do certain things. And I think one of the things that they'll need to do is play great special teams. And that's been kind of a staple of Jets football, going back to, the Mike Westhoff days. Mike Westhoff, one of the great special teams coaches of all time, was with the team for 4 head coaches. And in Brant Boyer's tenure, Jets typically had very good special teams. Last year was kind of an exception. Now, of course, Brant Boyer is gone. There's a new special teams coach in here. But, I think one of the challenges the Jets have, this is going back to what we talked about in the first segment, is the Jets are kind of trying to work around a passing game that probably won't be super dynamic. And that's tough to do because it is a passing league. And in order to win games without a great passing game, essentially like everything else on the team needs to work at a really high level. And the Jets also need the passing game to be respectable. But if you combine a passing game that's respectable with a top-notch run game and a good defense and an excellent special teams unit, you've got a shot in this league. And I think if you've watched the way the Jets have built, especially through the draft and undrafted free agency, there is a focus on building a strong unit on special teams. It's the hidden things that win games. Now, I think everybody knows when we're talking special teams, like the kicker is important. The kicker matters quite a bit. And Greg Zuerlein last year had a bad season. He ended up on IR. He was playing. I think he was kicking injured through much of the year. And that's the kind of thing that can really, it's easy to get on a kicker, but if he's kicking hurt, your mechanics mechanics for a kicker are a very precise thing, and an injury that forces you to compensate, maybe you're overstepping on one leg or something like that to try and overcompensate for an injury, it can mess everything up. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Greg Zuerlein bounce back. Of course, we talked yesterday about Caden Davis, the kicker the Jets signed from Ole Miss as a UDFA, and Anders Carlson. But typically, like, kickers bounce back. Guys with good track record as kickers like Greg Zuerlein do bounce back after bad seasons. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Zuerlein bounce back. There was a lot of talk about all the games the Jets lost because of the kicker last year, and that's partially true. I mean, another part of the story last year was that those games never should have been close to begin with. The games never should have come down to a kick. But I think better kicking this year obviously will do wonders for the Jets. And I wouldn't be shocked to see Zuerlein bounce back. But I think the Jets are also building a potentially really strong coverage unit because they've brought in guys who are really good cover guys. We talked yesterday a bit about the fourth round pick Arian Smith and an undrafted free agent Jamarcus Weston. Smith was part of an excellent Georgia coverage unit as a punt gunner. And Weston, if you read what was going on at Florida this year, there were a lot of articles that talked about how he was going to make the NFL as a gunner because he was just that good as a coverage guy on special teams. He was a guy who really never found a college position. Jamarcus Weston played safety, he played defensive end, he played wide receiver. I mean, try and find many guys who played those three specific positions in college. Probably not a lot. Probably not a lot of guys who played both wide receiver and defensive end, much less safety. But a guy who's very highly regarded for his work as a gunner. And you still have Irv Charles on the team, who is one of my favorite players, a guy who, low key, the guy who doesn't generate a lot of hype because he's not really a wide receiver. He's listed as a wide receiver, but really just a special teams ace, a guy who does a very good job on coverage units. And, the Jets could end up having a really strong coverage unit. And this matters because those hidden yards make a difference. If you force a team to go 80 yards instead of 65, because your coverage units are really good, it adds up. It adds up. And if you're able to pin a team deep because you have an excellent coverage unit and the defense forces a 3 and out, then your offense has a short field. And if your offense is kind of has issues, you make the game easier for them. If you give the offense a short field, there aren't as many. They don't need to do as much in order to put points on the board. So that kind of goes into what we talk about complementary football. And then a guy who during the season I referred to as my new favorite player, Quinnen Ngwangu, who had a kickoff return touchdown for the Jets against the Seattle Seahawks in the game I was at. He's back on the team, and maybe I'm overestimating what one game really means, but he looked explosive as a return guy. Jets, the kickoff, the NFL keeps trying to make the kickoff return grow in relevance. So Ngwangu could be a guy who ends up playing a role for the Jets this year. I don't want to say a big role because I still think kickoff return is not as significant as it used to be. But again, we're talking about the hidden yardage. The third phase of the game produces a lot of that, and sometimes special teams swing a game. One of the things that I think has been kind of underrated about the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty is how great they've been on special teams. And you look at the Chiefs, they they've won so many close playoff games. And look at how many times their special teams outperformed the opponent's special teams in those games. Look, of course, Reed and Mahomes are the most important element of that. I'm not suggesting special teams more important than having the best quarterback and the best coach of your generation. But having elite special teams has mattered a lot for Kansas City because, about half of NFL games are coming down to one score or less. And sometimes the special teams play is what swings it. So hopefully the Jets special teams bounce back. And if they do, and they combine it with a great run attack, a passable passing game, and a defensive bounce back, this could be a year that goes better than Jets fans are expecting. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we will do our weekly mailbag show. Can't wait to answer your questions. Talk to you then.